The chandelier above me cost more than my rent for the next decade. I knew because I'd personally overseen its delivery invoice 3 days ago. Signing my name in tiny, apologetic handwriting at the bottom of a document no one expected me to read twice. That was my life at these events. I handled the paperwork that made the glamour possible, then stood in the shadows and watched other people wear it. The Whitmore Grand Hotel Ballroom was everything its name promised. 300 guests in silk and stone-colored suits. Champagne towers that caught the light and threw it in every direction, like scattered diamonds. A string quartet playing something so refined it felt like music you weren't supposed to breathe too loudly near. I was backstage, technically, except there was no curtain separating me from the room. Just a low service corridor that ran along the east wall, giving me a clear view of the stage while keeping me invisible to the crowd. That was where I liked to be. Invisible. Efficient. Useful without being noticed. Celia. Noelle appeared beside me, pressing a clipboard against my arm. She was the only person on the entire planet who could make my name sound like a gentle scolding and a term of endearment simultaneously. Tell me you're not holding Donnelly's paddle. I looked down at my hand. I was, in fact, holding the bidding paddle of our absent boss, Roland Donnelly, who had excused himself 40 minutes ago to handle what he called a digestive situation of grave importance, and had not been seen since. The paddle was numbered 67, heavy mahogany with a gold border, and it did not belong in my hand. Someone had to hold it, I said. He said come back in 5 minutes. That was 40 minutes ago? Noelle looked at the stage with the expression she usually saved for weather forecasts that ruined outdoor events. They're about to do the final auction item. I know. I just need to... I looked around the service corridor for somewhere to set the paddle down. There was nowhere reasonable. A tray of empty champagne flutes, a folded tablecloth stand, a fire extinguisher. I'll find him. Celia. She caught my elbow. You cannot walk into that ballroom with that paddle while the auction is live. I know. The final item is... She lowered her voice to something close to a whisper. Though no one could hear us over the quartet and the quiet thunder of 300 wealthy people collectively composing themselves for the main event. It's her. I did not need her to specify who her was. The room had been charged with her presence since the moment Valeria D'Ambray arrived, 2 hours ago, in a black gown that seemed to absorb all available light and give back nothing it didn't choose to share. I'd watched the parting of the crowd from my service corridor like watching a tide pull back from a shore. Quietly, inevitably, and without the ocean asking permission. Valeria D'Ambray, hotel heiress, shipping magnate, the single largest annual donor to the Whitmore Children's Foundation, for whom tonight's gala was being thrown, and according to conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms, the woman who held the kind of power that didn't advertise itself with volume. She had security. Of course she had security. 2 women and 1 man, stationed at different points around the ballroom, all of them wearing the same particular brand of stillness that said they were watching everything and deciding nothing yet. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. The auctioneer, a silver-haired man named Prescott who had been hosting these galas for 15 years and carried himself like he was auctioning the concept of civilization itself, adjusted his microphone and smiled at the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we come now to the final item of the evening. Something unprecedented. Something that our most generous patron has personally offered in support of the Foundation's new pediatric wing." The room went quiet. In the particular way rooms go quiet when something significant is about to happen. Not silence exactly. The breathing changed. The glasses stilled. A private evening with Valeria D'Ambray herself. Dinner, one conversation, the full attention of our most remarkable benefactor. All proceeds going directly to the Children's Surgical Fund. We'll open the bidding at $50,000. I watched from the corridor. Valeria stood near the back of the room, still as carved marble, her expression giving away precisely nothing. She held a champagne glass she hadn't touched. A strand of dark hair lay perfectly against her cheek, and she did not move it. Bidding paddles went up around the room. 60,000. 70. 85. The numbers climbed with the particular recklessness of wealthy people competing not over what they wanted, but over what they wanted others to see them want. That was the moment I noticed the technical issue. The projector screen at the back of the stage, the one displaying the current bid, had frozen. The number was stuck at 70,000, not updating, while the auctioneer was announcing 95. I knew from experience that Prescott's assistant, a nervous young man named Owen, would need to be signaled immediately or the official record would be wrong and we'd have a documentation disaster on our hands that would last 3 weeks of angry emails. Owen was standing 15 feet away, near the edge of the stage, not looking at the screen because he was watching the bidders. I raised my hand, just to catch his attention. A small, efficient wave, the kind of gesture that should have been invisible. The room disagreed. 100,000, Prescott announced. Yes, we have a late entry from the event coordination staff, is that right? Paddle 67, $100,000. Do I hear 110? The room laughed, not cruelly. At least, not all of it. Some of it was the surprised delight of people who thought they had seen everything and discovered they had not. Some of it was something else, a collective lean in, a breath held, a gaze swiveling between the stage and the back of the room where Valeria D'Ambray stood. I could not move. My hand was still in the air, frozen in the gesture of trying to flag down an audio-visual assistant, and I was suddenly aware of approximately 300 pairs of eyes, the auctioneer's bright stage smile, and the fact that paddle 67 was still, technically, in my hand. Do I hear 110? Prescott asked again, with the patience of a man who had seen stranger things and would see stranger still. The room settled. No other paddle rose. The wealthy guests who had been bidding had apparently decided that someone making an accidental bid at $100,000 was more entertaining to watch than to challenge. Sold, Prescott said, and his gavel came down, and the sound it made was approximately the loudest thing I had ever heard in my life. To paddle 67. I put my hand down. Noelle was no longer beside me. Very slowly, I turned my head toward the back of the ballroom where Valeria D'Ambray had been standing. She was looking at me, not at the stage, not at Prescott. At me, in my service corridor, holding a paddle that did not belong to me, wearing a black event coordinator blazer and flat shoes on a floor that cost more per square foot than my monthly salary. She was looking at me with an expression I could not decode, which was somehow more frightening than any of the expressions I could have named. She set her untouched champagne on a passing tray, and she walked toward me. The crowd parted for her the way water parts for a stone, not because she pushed through it, because it understood, somehow, that it should move. I had several seconds to decide what to do, and I spent all of them deciding nothing, which was its own kind of decision. She stopped in front of me. Up close, she was taller than I'd expected. The black gown was silk, real silk, the kind that looked like it held its shape through sheer confidence. She smelled like something dark and expensive, amber maybe, or sandalwood, or whatever it is that certain women choose to wear when they want to remind every room they enter that they were there. Her eyes were a shade of brown so deep they were almost black, and they were fixed on my face with an attention I was wholly unprepared for. "You bought my night," she said. She did not say it loudly. She said it the way you might make an observation about the weather, quiet even, containing no particular alarm. But there was something in it, a current beneath the surface. I could not tell if she was amused or irritated, or something I didn't have a word for yet. I opened my mouth to explain. The entire explanation was ready. The frozen projector, Roland Donnelly, and his absent digestive distress, my attempt to signal Owen, The fact that I had absolutely no idea how charity auction bidding protocol worked from the bidder's side, because I had always been on the other side of it. I had a $100,000 explanation prepared in full, and what came out instead was, I was waving at Owen. There was a pause. Valeria D'Ambray looked at me. I stood there holding Roland Donnelly's paddle, and I wanted to put it down, except there was still nowhere to put it, and I was beginning to think that the most sophisticated women in the world had simply never encountered this particular problem because they never found themselves in positions where objects didn't have places. Owen, she repeated. The AV assistant. The projector was frozen at 70. I was trying to get his attention before the record went wrong. I heard my own voice saying these things, and it sounded reasonable and also completely absurd. It's not my paddle. I was holding it for... It doesn't matter. I'm so sorry. I'll speak to Mr. Prescott and explain the situation, and obviously I cannot... I mean the amount. $100,000, she said. I make 43 a year, I said, and then immediately wanted to step out of my own body. The corner of her mouth moved. It was small, almost nothing, but it moved. Come with me, she said. Ms. D'Ambray, I really think the better course is to speak to Prescott and Celia Arden. She had read my event badge. Of course she had. She read everything. The room is currently watching you, and the room is not kind when it is entertained. If you would like to resolve this without becoming the headline of 3 social columns by morning, you will come with me. I came with her. She moved through the ballroom without hurrying, which I could not do because I had to take 2 steps for every one of hers just to keep pace, and also because my hands were shaking in a way I was hoping she hadn't noticed, and was fairly certain she had. The crowd didn't stare openly, but I felt every angle of awareness tracking us from peripheral vision. I heard a laugh somewhere behind us, and could not tell if it was directed at me. She led me through a side door into a private corridor, all marble and low light, and closed the door behind us, and the sound of the ballroom reduced itself to a murmur. I exhaled. I will cover the donation, she said, before I could begin apologizing again. Donnelly's organization will receive credit. The record will reflect your paddle, which will reflect well on your boss, and he can stop hiding in whatever corner of this hotel he found comfortable. I stared at her. You know about Mr. Donnelly? I know everything about events I attend. She did not say it boastfully. She said it the way people state facts about physics. The donation is not your concern. The evening, however, is a separate matter. I'm sorry, I started again. Stop apologizing. It was not unkind. You've done it 3 times since I reached you, and the situation doesn't require it. I stopped. She studied me for a moment with that same calm, unreadable attention. You now owe me an evening, she said. Not your body, not your loyalty, not anything you haven't chosen to give. I am not in the habit of extracting things from people who didn't intend to offer them. What I want is honesty. You will accompany me for the rest of this event. You will not pretend to be something you aren't to impress these people. And you will tell me the truth when I ask you something. I held the mahogany paddle in both hands. That's it. That's it. That seems... I stopped myself from saying too easy, because it clearly wasn't easy. Nothing about standing in a private corridor with Valeria D'Ambray felt easy. Okay, I said instead. She nodded once. Put the paddle down. I'll have someone return it to Donnelly. She produced a small phone from somewhere and sent a message in 3 seconds. And Celia Arden, your shoes are practical. That will help when Helena tries to corner you near the North Terrace, which she will, because you are now the most interesting thing that's happened to the room tonight. I looked up. Helena! But she had already turned toward the door. I put the paddle down against the wall and followed her back into the ballroom. Valeria D'Ambray moved through wealth the way a current moves through water, not disrupting it exactly, but redirecting everything it touched. I stayed close enough to be clearly associated with her and tried to look like a person who had planned to be there, which was something I had never once in my career been asked to do. "That woman in the blue," Valeria said quietly as we passed a cluster of guests near the champagne stations. "She is on 3 foundation boards and has donated to none of them in 14 months. She will ask about the children's wing funding structure. Tell her the numbers are publicly available through the foundation's annual report. She won't like it, but she'll respect you for knowing it." I processed this. "You know her?" "I know everyone here." A moment later, the blue-gowned woman pivoted smoothly toward us with the specific radar of someone who had been watching from a careful distance. "Valeria, darling. And you must be the brave young woman from the auction. How delightful." "Celia Arden," I said. "I'm with the event coordination team. Are you enjoying the evening?" "Oh, very much. I was just curious about the new children's wing. Such an ambitious project. I wonder how the foundation is managing the funding structure." "The details are publicly available in the foundation's annual report," I said. "We published it last quarter. I'm happy to send you the link tomorrow." The woman smiled, and it was the smile of someone recalibrating. "Of course. How efficient." Valeria said nothing as we moved past, but I noticed she angled half a step closer to my side, which I told myself was simply a matter of proximity in a crowded room, and not anything I needed to notice. The next hour was a masterclass I had not enrolled in. Valeria did not hold my hand or loop her arm through mine or perform nearness for the crowd's benefit. She simply stayed within range, and her presence made every conversation I had different. People spoke to me carefully. They watched me the way they watched each other, not as staff, not as an awkward mistake, but as someone who had earned a place in the room through means they couldn't quite calculate. I noticed things about her in the spaces between the conversations. She never took more than one sip of any drink. I watched her accept a second glass of champagne near the dessert display and carry it for 20 minutes without touching it. When a waiter offered her a third, she declined with a shake of her head that required no words. She always knew where the exits were. I figured this out when I caught her eyes moving. Not nervously, not with any visible anxiety, but with a systematic attention that swept each door and window and service entrance in sequence, checking and filing. Like breathing. She probably didn't know she was doing it. When a small girl from the charity's outreach program was brought out to say a few words on stage, the foundation raised funds for children's hospital services, and they sometimes featured families who had been helped. Valeria went completely still. The controlled elegance in her face didn't crack, exactly, but something in it softened. Not for the room. The room wasn't looking at her. It was for herself. A private thing. And I watched it happen with the strange feeling of witnessing something I hadn't been meant to see. After the child's speech, Valeria looked away from the stage and her eyes met mine, and I realized she had noticed me noticing. I looked down at my own glass. "She reminds me of someone," Valeria said very quietly. I didn't ask who. That felt like the right choice. Near the edge of the terrace entrance, a man found us. He was polished in the way that required effort, the kind of beautiful that gets maintained rather than given. Dark suit, silver cufflinks, the kind of haircut that cost $300 and was designed to look like it didn't. He walked toward Valeria with the particular ease of someone who believed his approach would be welcome. "Valeria." His smile was wide and gave me nothing. "Wonderful evening." "Mark." Her voice was exactly the same, but something in her posture changed, very slightly, the way a door closes without slamming, an inch more still, an ounce more guarded. "I hear the auction was eventful." His eyes moved to me with the particular appraisal of someone adding a variable to a calculation. "Your evening companion, charming." "Celia," she said, "could you excuse us for a moment?" I understood. "Of course." I started to step away. "Actually," Mark said, "she can stay. What I have to say isn't confidential, Valeria. It's simply a reminder that the arrangement we discussed in January hasn't changed. The timeline is what it is." "The timeline," Valeria said, is something we'll discuss at an appropriate time and venue, not at a charity gala. I always find galas appropriate. He smiled at me again. Lovely to meet you, Celia. Take care of yourself. The people Valeria keeps tend to need it. He walked away easy and unhurried, and I stood very still beside Valeria and tried to keep my face neutral. I need you to go find Noelle Hart, Valeria said quietly. She's your coworker. She's near the registration table. Tell her you're going to be staying with me for the remainder of the evening. What did he mean? The people you keep tend to need it. She looked at me directly. He meant it as a warning? To me or about you? Something crossed her face. Both, probably. I'm not going to find Noelle, I said. I mean, I will, but not because you're sending me away. I heard enough to understand that what just happened wasn't friendly, and I'm not a child who needs to be removed from uncomfortable conversations. You're a charity event coordinator holding borrowed paddle 67 who accidentally bid $100,000 on a woman you've never met, she said. Your night has been complicated enough. My night got complicated because I was trying to do my job correctly, I said. And now I'm doing my job correctly again, which includes not abandoning you in the middle of whatever that was. There was a silence. She looked at me with an expression I still couldn't read, and I held it. And then the corner of her mouth moved again, the way it had in the corridor. Find your Noelle, she said. Tell her you're all right. Then come back. I found Noelle near the registration table, exactly where Valeria had said, which I was going to think about later. Noelle grabbed my arm with both hands and made a sound that wasn't quite words. I'm okay, I said. You bid $100,000 on the Mafia queen. Don't call her that. Everyone calls her that. It's not her name. I wasn't sure why I said it so quickly. She's covering the donation herself. I'm fine. I'm going to stay with her for the rest of the evening. Noelle looked at me the way she looked at things she didn't fully believe. Celia, you know what people say about her? People say a lot of things about a lot of women they find too powerful to categorize, I said. I'll text you at 11. Text me at 10, she said. With a vowel in it, so I know you typed it yourself. I went back to Valeria. She was standing near the North Terrace entrance, exactly as she'd predicted Helena would find her. And Helena, a woman of perhaps 60 with silver hair, perfect posture, and the kind of authority that comes from decades of practice, had indeed arrived. I watched from a respectful distance until Valeria turned and found me with her eyes, and something in her shoulder released, barely perceptibly, before she stepped aside and re-engaged with Helena. I moved closer. Valeria D'Ambray looked at me the way a chess player looks at a piece appearing on an unexpected square. This is Celia Arden, Valeria said. She's with me tonight. So I understand. Helena's voice was cultured and careful. Celia, you created quite a stir. It was an accident, I said, but the donation will go to the Children's Fund, which was the point of the evening. Helena smiled. It didn't reach anything above her cheekbones. Yes, the point of the evening. She looked back at Valeria. We should speak tomorrow. The March schedule needs adjusting. Tomorrow, Valeria agreed. Helena left. I watched her go and felt the ambient temperature of the terrace entrance return to something normal. She doesn't approve of you, I said. Helena doesn't approve of anything she can't categorize, Valeria said. You are to her an unknown variable in a calculation she thought she had balanced. What calculation? She didn't answer that. Are you hungry? They have actual food beyond the decorative hors d'oeuvres if you know where to ask. I was, in fact, hungry. I hadn't eaten since noon. Yes, I said. Then come. The car was black, of course, a long, private kind of black that said it had never been hailed on a street corner. I sat in the back seat beside Valeria and watched the city slide past the tinted windows and tried to understand how the last 4 hours of my life had happened to me. It started raining somewhere around Midtown, the kind of rain that comes without warning, Heavy, immediate, determined. The lights of other cars and buildings blurred and scattered across the glass, and the inside of the car became a small, warm, amber-lit world, separate from everything outside it. Valeria's driver had taken a different route than the one I'd given, and I'd noticed it but hadn't said anything for the first several minutes because I was watching the rain and processing the evening, and also because the car was extremely comfortable and I was exhausted. "This isn't the way to Carroll Gardens," I said. "No." I looked at her. Her face in the tinted window rainlight was all shadow and plain, elegant and still. "Are we being followed?" She considered not answering. I could see her considering it. "A precaution," she said finally. I looked out the back window. There was nothing obvious, but I wasn't trained to see obvious, and I suspected the people Valeria worried about weren't trained to be seen. "Because of Mark?" "Mark makes statements. This isn't his style." She paused. "It may simply be the attention from the auction. You have become interesting to certain people tonight." "I was trying to signal Owen," I said. "I know." A silence. Rain on the window glass. "I'm sorry for that." I looked at her. "You didn't do anything." I offered myself as an auction item, and the room took advantage of a woman trying to do her job. She said it with the particular flatness of someone who doesn't easily say things like this, and is choosing to say it anyway. That's an apology I am choosing to give, whether or not the culpability is strictly mine. I turned that over in my mind. The rain kept falling. The city kept rearranging itself into new configurations through the glass. "You knew the projector was frozen," I said slowly. "You said you know everything about events you attend." She said nothing. "You saw me signaling Owen," I said. "And you didn't tell Prescott it was a mistake." The car moved through a slower corridor of rain. Her hand rested on the seat between us, very still, not reaching for anything. "I have attended a great many charity galas," she said, "and I have provided a great many large donations, and people have wanted things from me at every single one. A business advantage, access, an alliance, something, always something." She paused. "You were trying to fix a projector screen." I understood. "You didn't correct it because I wasn't trying to get anything. I thought," she said carefully, "that for one evening it might be interesting to spend time with someone who didn't know what they were reaching for." I didn't know what to do with that. The rain fell, city lights slid over her profile, her cheekbone, the line of her jaw. "You're lonely," I said, and I did not plan to say it. It simply arrived and departed through my mouth without clearing it with the rest of me, and once it was out, I could not put it back. Her head turned toward me. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. "That was honest," she said. "You promised me honesty." I held very still. Her hand was still on the seat between us, and she didn't move it. "Yes," she said, so quietly I might have misheard if the car hadn't been silent. "Yes, Celia." "I am." The penthouse was at the top of a hotel I recognized as one of the D'Ambray properties, a building I had seen from street level 100 times and never been inside. The elevator required a keycard and a code, and the doors opened directly into a space that took my breath in spite of myself. It was extraordinary. All glass on one side, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-soaked city, 1,000 lights blurring and shifting below us. The furniture was expensive and spare, and arranged with the particular minimalism that spoke not of style choices, but of someone who had never learned to accumulate comfort. There were no personal photographs, no books left open on surfaces, no candles burned down to their own memory. It was a place someone lived without inhabiting it. "The guest room has a private bath," Valeria said. "I'll have dry clothes brought up." "I don't need—" "Your blazer has been damp since you came out of the service corridor." She was already at the kitchen, her phone out, messaging someone. "Sit down, Celia. Please." I sat on a couch that probably cost more than my car. I looked out at the city. Someone arrived within 7 minutes, a woman I didn't see closely, delivering folded clothing and soft-soled shoes, and I changed in the guest bathroom, which was marble and warm light, and exactly the kind of bathroom you described to friends as insane, like a hotel within a hotel. When I came back, Valeria had exchanged her gown for dark trousers and a loose white shirt, her hair no longer perfect, one strand loose near her temple, and she was making tea with the practiced quiet of someone who found it useful to have something to do with their hands. She poured 2 cups without asking and set one on the coffee table in front of me. I picked it up. It was good. Of course it was. How long have you been running from your family's reputation? I asked. She sat across from me, angled toward the window. Since I understood what it was. How old were you? 14. She said it simply. I understood at 14 what my grandfather had built, and what my father had preserved, and what I was inheriting. And I understood that understanding it wasn't enough. What you build from an inheritance you didn't choose is the only thing about it that belongs to you. Is that why you donate to children's foundations? She looked at me with an attention that was different from the gala's attention, more open, or maybe just less armored. Among other reasons, she said. The girl on stage tonight, I said. The one who reminded you of someone. My sister, she said after a pause. She was ill when we were young. We didn't have the kind of money that turns an illness into something survivable. By the time my family's particular kind of fortune was available to us, she didn't need it anymore. I didn't say I'm sorry because it would have come out the wrong way, as a small word for a large grief. Instead, I sat with what she'd said and let it occupy the space it needed. She was 13, Valeria said. I was 15. There's a children's wing of a hospital in Naples now. My name is not on it. I held my tea. Why not? Because my name on a hospital wing tells children that the kind of person who helps them is the kind of person people fear. She paused. I prefer they believe help comes from somewhere uncomplicated. I looked at her across the coffee table, in her white shirt and her quiet penthouse, with the rain still falling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I thought, there are so many versions of you. The one the room sees, the one the whispers build, the one you constructed over years to keep people at a manageable distance. And then this one, with the tea and the loose strand of hair and the sister who needed help that came too late. Your necklace, she said, and I blinked. I reached up, the clasp of the thin chain I wore, a small thing, vintage my grandmother's, had slipped, and the chain was sliding sideways. Oh, may I? I froze for a moment. Then I nodded and turned slightly, lifting my hair. Her fingers were careful. I felt them at the back of my neck, very precise, finding the clasp without any fumbling. The chain settled back in place. Her hand lingered for one moment, the span of one quiet breath, before she withdrew it. I turned back around. She was closer than I'd registered, near enough that I could see the individual lashes at the corner of her eye, the slight asymmetry of her mouth, the way she was looking at me as though she was trying to decide something. Her phone rang. She closed her eyes for 1 second, a visible, deliberate pause, and then stood and crossed to the window to answer it. Her voice from where I sat was low and sharp and completely different from the voice she'd been using with me, and after 3 minutes, she ended the call and stood facing the rain. I need to handle something, she said. The guest room. Please, stay if the weather keeps. My security will drive you whenever you're ready. Valeria, she turned. Whatever you were just deciding, I said. I'm not made of glass. She looked at me for a long moment. I know, she said. That's exactly what concerns me. I did not stay in the penthouse. I waited for the rain to ease, and then I took the car home, and I sat in my actual apartment with its secondhand furniture and its good bookshelf and my plants that were doing adequately, and I tried to feel the ordinary weight of my ordinary life. It didn't fit the same way it had that morning. Noelle texted at 10:02. I sent back okay, which contained all the vowels she'd requested. She sent back a string of expressive characters that communicated both relief and the particular satisfaction of being right about something. I went to work the next morning and felt the gossip before I heard it. It moved through the office as gossip does, in the particular quality of paused conversations that resumed when I wasn't quite close enough, in the looks that lasted a beat too long, in the way people asked how I was doing with a brightness that meant they were asking something different. Roland Donnelly returned from his indisposition, thanked me effusively for representing the organization with such distinction at the auction. He seemed to believe I had done it on purpose, as a networking strategy, and I lacked the energy to correct him. A flower arrived at my desk that afternoon. Not a bouquet. A single dark-stemmed flower, a night-blooming variety I had to look up, delivered without a card. 2 days later, a formal letter arrived confirming that a $25,000 donation had been made to the Whitmore Children's Foundation in the name of Celia Arden Event Coordination Division. I read the letter 3 times. By the end of the week, I had noticed a quiet security presence at a distance. Someone who appeared, with suspicious regularity, in the vicinity of my lunch break, my commute route home, and the parking structure where I sometimes stayed late on inventory nights. They were discreet. They were not discreet enough. Noelle was the one who made me name it. "She's watching over you," she said, with the certainty of someone who had connected all the dots and was waiting for me to do the same. "She has no right to do that," I said. "Is she wrong to do it, though?" "That's not the same question." Noelle tilted her head. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." I called the number on the donation letter's contact line, which was not Valeria directly, but an assistant who was clearly very good at managing which messages reached her. I left a message asking for a meeting. The next morning, a car arrived at my building at 9 a.m. sharp, and the driver knew my name, and I got in. She was at a private dining room in one of the D'Ambray hotels, a room I had never been to because it wasn't on any website or any guest floor map. She was already there when I arrived, wearing a deep blue jacket and reading something on her phone. And when I walked in, she set it face down on the table and gave me her full attention in the way that I was beginning to understand was characteristic of her. Full attention? Absolute. Like nothing in the room existed until you did. "You've been having me followed," I said, because there was no version of this conversation that worked if I opened with small talk. "I've had someone available," she said, "in case the attention from the auction created any problems for you." Without asking. A pause. "Yes." "Valeria?" I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Protection without consent still looks like control from where I'm standing. She was quiet. Not the defensive kind of quiet, not the kind that's preparing its counter-argument. She was actually listening. I grew up around people who made decisions for me because they thought it was easier than asking. I said, "My mother, my first boss. 2 out of 3 supervisors I've had since. They all thought they were helping. They weren't wrong about the help. They were wrong about how it felt." She set her hands flat on the table. "I'm sorry," she said. And the thing about it was that it didn't sound like a tactic. It was direct, unelaborated, and she held eye contact through the whole of it. "You're right. I made a decision that wasn't mine to make. I hadn't expected that. I'd prepared for argument, for explanation, for the polished version of why she'd been reasonable. "Thank you," I said, a little off balance. "What would you like?" she asked. I stared at her. "I mean it," she said. "You came here with a complaint, which was warranted, and I'd like to know what you want me to do instead." No one had ever asked me that, or they had asked and not waited for the answer, or they had asked with a menu of 2 options already prepared. She asked it like the answer was genuinely open, and she genuinely wanted to hear it. I said slowly, "to make my own choices about my own safety. If there's something I should know about, tell me. I'm not an event coordinator incapable of making informed decisions. But don't put people near me without telling me they're there. That's fair, she said. And the donations. The ones in my name. The donations support Sakios you care about. It also changes how people at work look at me, I said. It's attached to your name by association. And that's information I should have had before it happened, not after. She looked at the table for a moment. When she looked up, something in her expression had shifted. Not open exactly, but cracked open a little at the corner. I've spent so many years operating in spaces where asking permission isn't possible, she said. I know that's an explanation, not an excuse. It's both, I said. And it's also not my problem to solve. She looked at me like I'd done something surprising. No, she said. It isn't. We had breakfast. Real breakfast, not a performance of it. Eggs and toast and strong coffee and the kind of conversation that happens when two people have already cleared the air and there is no agenda left except to be in the same room. She told me about a children's hospital fundraiser happening in 3 weeks, one she funded privately, for a facility in the Bronx that served families who couldn't access the big-ticket galas. She asked if I'd help coordinate it. I said yes. The fundraiser was nothing like the Whitmore Gala. It was held in the hospital's own community room, decorated with handmade artwork by the kids themselves, catered by a local restaurant that usually did birthday parties. Valeria arrived without visible security, in a simple dark dress and flat shoes, and she went around the room and spoke to every single parent who was there, and she knew all of their names. I stood near the back and watched her. She was different in this room. Not smaller. She never seemed small, but the armor was somewhere else. She laughed quietly, at something a father of a 7-year-old said. She helped a grandmother find her reading glasses, which had slipped under a chair. She spent 20 minutes talking to a teenage boy who was there with his younger brother, and whatever she said made him laugh and then look slightly less hunched than he'd been when she arrived. She found me during a lull. You've been watching me, she said, but she didn't say it accusatorially. You know every family in this room, I said. I've been supporting this facility for 6 years. The foundation gala donors would recognize none of them. No. A pause. That's the point. Something settled in my chest. Not a lurch, not a lightning strike, the way it is in stories where attraction arrives like weather. Something more gradual. A stone finding its place in a riverbed. A change so quiet that you only recognize it once it's already complete. That evening, after the last family had gone and the volunteer cleanup crew had arrived, Valeria led me to a rooftop greenhouse on the hospital's upper floor. A recent addition funded anonymously, growing herbs and vegetables the hospital used in its cafeteria and donated to families who needed them. She'd wanted to check on a project there, a type of climbing plant she'd suggested for the eastern wall that was apparently having trouble. I walked into the greenhouse and felt the temperature change. Warm, humid, green-smelling in the living way that only happens where things are genuinely growing. Small lights threaded through the plant frames. Outside the greenhouse panels, the city moved through its evening, distant and bright. Valeria looked at the climbing plant and frowned in a way that was completely different from her usual expressions. She crouched down and examined the base of the stem and said to herself, "Too much direct light on the roots." She was still for a moment. Then, so slowly I thought I imagined it. The corner of her mouth curved up. A real smile. Not the controlled adjustment I'd seen at the gala. Not the dry quarter movement in the private corridor. A genuine, unguarded, and briefly undefended smile, directed at a stubborn vine that was doing its best. "There you are," I said softly. She stood and looked at me. "The person nobody gets to see," I said. She didn't answer right away. The plants breathed around us, green and patient. "You make it sound like something I've been hiding," she said. "Haven't you?" "From people who would use it," she said. "That's not hiding. That's surviving." I understood that too well to argue with it. "I'm not going to use it." "I know." She said it quietly. That's been the problem, Celia, since the moment I didn't correct Prescott's call. We were close in the greenhouse. It was a small space between the plant frames, and we'd been moving along the walkway together. Close enough that I could see the exact place where her expression was trying to be controlled and wasn't quite managing it. "I'm afraid of your world," I said. It felt important to say it plainly. The car on the rain road, Mark Ravetti and what he wasn't saying, Helena looking at me like an equation she needed to balance. "I'm afraid of all of it." She nodded. She was listening. "And I'm more afraid," I said, "of never seeing the real you again." She reached up and tucked the loose strand of hair behind my ear with 2 fingers. Very slow, very careful. Her hand stilled at the side of my face, not holding, not pressing, just resting the way a question rests before an answer. "Celia, don't leave," I said. "Whatever you're about to say about safety or distance or the kinds of women you tell yourself you're protecting people from, don't." She looked at me for a long, suspended moment. The plants around us, the city outside the panels, the warm, small world of a rooftop greenhouse on a Thursday evening. Then she kissed me. It was careful at first. The careful of someone who hasn't allowed themselves something in a long time. And then it wasn't careful. It was the thing underneath the careful, which is where the truth lives. All warmth and held breath and the specific ache of wanting something you've convinced yourself you can't have. My hands found the lapels of her jacket and hers were in my hair, and the city outside did not matter at all. We pulled back at the same moment. Her eyes were dark and close. "I should tell you this changes nothing dangerous," she said, a little unsteady. "Because that would be honest. And I promised you honesty." "I know," I said. "I'm choosing it anyway." She kissed me again, briefer, and then pressed her forehead to mine, and that was perhaps the most intimate thing. The afterward, the quiet, that held what the words couldn't. 3 weeks passed in a way I've since learned to call the best 3 weeks of my adult life, and also the most terrifying. She was present in ways that were quiet and specific. A book she thought I'd find useful, left on the passenger seat of the car that picked me up for planning meetings. A reservation at a restaurant she knew I'd mentioned wanting to try, made in my name so I could bring Noelle without it being a thing she arranged. A late-night call where she said almost nothing, and I held the phone and listened to the sound of her moving through her penthouse, and we both somehow felt less alone. We went for a late-night walk through a hotel garden she had access to after hours. A closed garden, November bare, but lit with small winter lanterns someone had left up past their season, and she walked with her hands in her coat pockets, and I walked with mine in mine, and we talked about everything that wasn't her world or mine, about the books we'd loved as children and the countries neither of us had seen, and what we thought the best version of a Thursday morning looked like. She came to my apartment once. I was briefly embarrassed by the scale of it compared to what she was used to, but she walked in and sat on my secondhand couch and took her shoes off and put her feet on my coffee table, and said, "This is the first room I've been in this month that looks like someone actually lives in it." And I made pasta and we ate it at my small kitchen table. And she helped with the dishes without being asked. She taught me how to dance. Properly. Not the careful public version we'd performed at the gala. We were in the private dining room of the hotel where we'd had breakfast, and the room was empty, and there was music from a phone, and she took my hand and placed it correctly and moved with me through the steps until I stopped counting them. "You're thinking about the footwork," she said. "I'm trying to not step on you. You're allowed to trust me," she said. "With the steps, at least." "That sounds like more than the steps." She turned me smoothly. "Yes," she said. "It does." And then March happened. I found out the way I found out most things in Valeria's world, by being adjacent to information that wasn't meant for me. I was picking up planning files from an office in the D'Ambray Hotel administrative wing. Legitimate, expected, nothing unusual, when I overheard 2 voices through an imperfectly closed door. Not the content exactly, but enough. Mark Ravetti's name. Helena's voice. The phrase, "the Arden woman," used in a sentence whose end I didn't catch. and then the phrase, "Valeria needs to understand what's at stake." I stood in the corridor holding my planning folder and felt the quality of the silence change around me. I went back to my office. I thought about it for 3 days, and then things started changing. Valeria canceled 2 plans, then 3. She was present on the calls, but abbreviated. The controlled elegance back to its original distance, the armor resealed. She didn't explain it, and I gave her the space I thought she needed. And then the space became a wall, and the wall became her telling me in the private dining room over coffee that neither of us touched that she thought we'd made a mistake. "The auction was exciting," she said, "and I'm fond of you. But what I was feeling, I think it was circumstances, loneliness and proximity. That's not a foundation." She delivered it precisely. It sounded like something she'd practiced. I sat across from her and felt the floor change beneath me. "That's not true," I said. "Celia, you are not someone who confuses loneliness with love," I said. "You're too careful for that. I've watched you be careful. This is something else." "This," she said, "is me being honest." I looked at her. At the set of her jaw, the way her hands were flat on the table, the careful absence of anything in her eyes. She wasn't being honest. She was being protective. And the thing about people who protect others by lying is that they believe it's generosity, and it's actually the most painful thing they can do. "Okay," I said. She looked up. "Okay," I said again quietly. "If that's what you need to tell me right now." I picked up my coat. I walked out. I did not cry in the elevator, which took effort, and I did cry in the car, which took none. Noelle came over that night with wine and the specific rage of a loyal person on behalf of someone they love. "She's protecting you from something," she said. "I know. So fight for it." "I can't fight for it if she doesn't want to be fought for," I said. "That's not fighting. That's not listening to her. No." Noelle looked at me for a moment. "There's a difference between no and I'm scared." "I know that too," I said, "but she has to be the one to figure that out." I went back to ordinary life with the particular grim discipline of someone putting one foot in front of the other, because the alternative is staying still. I ran Noelle's half marathon with her. I reorganized my client files. I took on a new event contract for a spring fundraiser and threw myself into the logistics with the intensity of someone who had energy to spend and didn't want to spend it on missing someone. I missed her through my sense of smell, the amber and sandalwood that lingered briefly in enclosed spaces and wasn't there. I missed her through rain on windows, which now always looked like city lights sliding over a profile I wasn't supposed to have memorized. I missed her through the particular quality of full attention, the kind that made you feel briefly legible to someone who actually wanted to read. I found out what happened on a Thursday afternoon in late April when Noelle forwarded me a piece from a finance news site with the subject line, "Read this." The article detailed a formal legal complaint filed by the D'Ambray corporate holding group against Mark Ravetti's business interests. A documentation of a scheme by which Ravetti had attempted to use the D'Ambray name as collateral for a series of deeply questionable financial arrangements, citing coercion and fraudulent representation. Helena D'Ambray had apparently been part of the arrangement, leveraged against Valeria's personal interests in ways the article described as a complex internal family dispute with significant financial implications. I read it 4 times, and then I read the announcement at the bottom. Added 3 days earlier, Valeria D'Ambray has assumed sole executive authority over D'Ambray Holdings, following a restructuring of the organization's governance. Helena D'Ambray was not named in the new structure. She had done it. Not with violence, not with the tools her grandfather's legacy would have offered. Through lawyers and documents and public record. I put my phone down and looked out my window at the ordinary street outside my ordinary building, and I thought about what it costs to take apart the thing you were given and build it differently, and how long you carry the weight of the dismantling before you can put it down. There was a gala the following Saturday. I knew about it because I had previously been involved in coordinating part of it before my contract had shifted. the Fairhaven Spring Charity Evening at a hotel downtown, one of the season's larger events. It was being attended by the city's usual constellation of donors and notable figures, and I had no professional reason to be there. I bought a ticket. It used my savings for a month's groceries, and I ate pasta for the subsequent 2 weeks, and I am not sorry. I wore the dress Valeria had sent without a note, months ago. It fit me exactly, which had seemed strange at the time, and now seemed inevitable. She was there. I found her in the room the same way you find north. Not by looking for it exactly, but by knowing which direction your attention defaults to. She was in black again, silk again, surrounded by people who were speaking at her rather than to her, and her expression was the original version, the one the room got. Controlled, elegant, distant as something carved in stone. Helena was there also, standing apart, with the particular expression of someone who has recently lost something they considered a sure thing. Mark Ravetti was not there. I found out later he was attending a different kind of meeting with different kinds of legal representatives. I crossed the room. People looked at me. I was aware of being looked at, and I let it happen without adjusting myself to accommodate it, which was new. Noelle would have said it was growth. I thought it was simply that I had run out of space in me for apology. I reached Valeria's circle. The people surrounding her had the instinctive closing quality of those protecting a center, and I waited. And after a moment, Valeria noticed me the way she always noticed me. Not first glance, not scan, but the particular attention that arrives when something specific becomes present in the space. She went very still. "Excuse me," she said to the circle. She said it without looking at them. They stepped back. I stepped forward. We were close, the noise of the gala around us, the chandeliers above. "You ended it to protect me," I said. Not an accusation, just the fact. "Celia," her voice was careful, "from Helena and Mark and whatever they were going to do to my career, my reputation, my ability to work. You decided that before you asked me whether I wanted to be protected." "I know," she said. "I broke my own rule." "You broke my heart," I said, and it came out simple and true without any drama in it. "And you did it because you thought it was generous, and it wasn't. It was the same thing I told you about in the beginning. A decision made for someone instead of with them." "Yes," she said it quietly. "I know." "Why?" I said. "After everything you told me about wanting someone who saw you instead of the title. After the greenhouse, after the dancing. Why did you decide you knew better than I did what I could survive?" She looked at me for a long moment. Around us, the gala continued its expensive business. The clink of glasses, the quartet, the murmur of 300 people who knew each other's net worth and not their names. "Because I have watched," she said, "every person who ever mattered to me become a target. Because my sister got sick, and I couldn't fix it. And everyone I cared about after her, I kept at a measured distance, because distance was the only protection I knew how to give. Because you walked into my evening trying to fix a projector screen, and you were kind to the serving staff, and you looked at that little girl on stage and then at me, and you saw something. I don't know what. Something I hadn't shown anyone in a very long time." The gala moved around us. She held my gaze. "And I panicked," she said, "because I have built a very effective life around not panicking, and you made me panic anyway." "Valeria," I said. "I should not have ended it without asking you," she said. "I should have told you what was happening. I should have let you choose." "Yes," I said. "I'm telling you now." She took a breath that was not quite steady, which was the least steady thing I had ever seen her do. "I would like you back, if that is still something you want. And I want you to know that what I will give you, going forward, is not perfect. I'm not built for perfect. But it is honest, and it is chosen. And it is more than I have given anyone in 15 years. I looked at her. This woman in her silk and her empire and her careful built armor, standing in a ballroom full of people who feared her and offering me something that cost her more than any of the things they feared her for. Helena was watching from across the room. I noticed her noticing us. I noticed that I did not care. "Tell Helena," I said, "that she can add me to whatever calculus she's running and adjust her projections accordingly. Tell Mark Ravetti the same thing. Tell anyone who is planning to use me as a variable that I am not a variable. I'm a person you chose." I reached out and took her hand in the middle of the Fairhaven Spring Charity Evening in front of 300 people, and Helena D'Ambray's recalculating expression and whoever else was watching. Her fingers closed around mine. "Celia," she said very quietly. "I choose it," I said. "Your world, the complications, the work it takes. I'm not choosing it because I don't know what it costs. I'm choosing it because I know you." The mask didn't shatter. It wasn't that dramatic, and she wasn't that kind of woman. But something in her face shifted that I had only seen once before, in a rooftop greenhouse with a stubborn vine, and it was the thing that lived under the armor, and it was hers, and she was letting me see it in a room full of people she usually refused to be visible for. She raised my hand and pressed her mouth to my knuckles, and the room could see it, and she let them see it. The resolution was not loud. Valeria was not a loud person, and she didn't suddenly become one. The exposure of Helena's involvement in the Ravetti arrangement moved through the appropriate legal channels with the speed and quiet efficiency of someone who had spent months preparing it, rather than hours, because she had. Mark's scheme unraveled publicly, not through any action I took or witnessed directly, but through the simple mechanism of documentation meeting daylight. What I know is what Valeria told me later, in the honest way she had found her way back to. She had been building the legal case for months. Keeping those she cared about at a distance had been part of it, an attempt to insulate them while she assembled the architecture of her own liberation. That didn't make the March coffee hurt less in retrospect, but it made it legible, and legible things are things you can eventually put down. Helena was removed from the corporate structure with a settlement Valeria described as appropriate to both the relationship and the conduct. I didn't ask for the number. She offered, and I shook my head, because there are parts of her world that are hers, and boundaries are not always walls. The D'Ambray Holdings restructuring made 3 financial columns and 1 editorial about women in corporate succession that mentioned Valeria's name in terms I think would have surprised the people who'd written about her before. She read it in my kitchen over coffee and said nothing, and then put her phone face down on the table and asked if there was more toast. There was. There was always more toast. That was the kind of morning we were building. 6 months later, on a clear October evening, I stood inside the Fairhaven Grand Ballroom. Different hotel, same industry. My event now because the spring had brought me a contract through my own name. The beginning of the small coordination studio I'd told myself for years was not quite possible, and watched the final auction item announced, a private dinner with a major donor whose name the program listed simply as VD. Valeria was there. She stood in the back in a deep red dress that was new and looked at the room the way she always did, noting exits, reading people, knowing everything. She found me across the crowd the way she always found me, without searching. The auctioneer began. I had my own paddle this time. A proper one, assigned to me at registration in my own name, entirely intentional. I raised it, not by accident, not to signal anyone, not because of any miscommunication or unfortunate positioning or an AV malfunction with impeccable timing, just because I wanted to. The room laughed, the kind that recognizes a joke it's in on. Valeria closed her eyes for a brief moment, which was her version of delight. When I reached her after the auction, she was standing near the garden entrance where we'd first found this version of us. And she had a glass of something she hadn't touched, and she looked at me with the expression that was only ever for me, the one with nothing hidden in it. "You bid on me again," she said. "I knew what I was doing this time." "You couldn't possibly win," she said. The reserve was 50,000. I know, I said. I bid anyway. She looked at me for a moment. Then she reached out and took my hand and turned it over and pressed her lips, briefly, to the inside of my wrist. You never bought my night, she said, quietly enough that only I could hear her. The night was always yours. You just gave me a reason to stop pretending otherwise. She held my hand, and the chandeliers held the light. And somewhere below us, the city moved through its evening, ordinary and enormous and full of everything that hadn't happened to us yet. I leaned up and pressed my mouth to the corner of her jaw, just below her ear, where she always smelled like amber and something warmer, something that now also carried the faint traces of my apartment and my coffee and the ordinary mornings I had spent the year learning to offer her. We slipped out through the garden door before the speeches began, the way we'd been doing since the spring, choosing the quiet edge of things rather than the center. Her hand was warm in mine. The night was cool and clear. What does next week look like? She asked. I have the Archer Foundation site visit Tuesday, I said, and I told Noelle we'd do Sunday brunch. I have calls in the morning. I could do Sunday brunch. Noelle will ask you 3 impossible questions and 1 embarrassing one, and then decide she likes you, I said. I've survived worse interrogations. Not like Noelle. She laughed. It was quiet and real, the kind she'd learned to let happen without clearing it through the armor first, and it made the lamplight in the garden seem warmer than it was. Celia, she said. Thank you. I looked up at her, her face in the courtyard light, the empire she'd spent years trying to reclaim from its worst parts, the woman she'd let me see in a greenhouse in November, with a stubborn vine and a genuinely startled smile. For the bid, I said. For the stubbornness, she said. For the projector. For not being a person who wanted something from me I wasn't ready to give. For asking me what I wanted and meaning it. She brought my hand up briefly to rest against her cheek. For all of it. I turned my face into her shoulder, and she turned her head and pressed her lips to my hair, and we stood there in the garden outside the gala, the 2 of us and the night and the city and everything ahead of us that we hadn't named yet, because we were going to build it slowly, carefully, honestly, the way you build anything worth keeping. I had raised my hand by accident once and changed my whole life. I raised it again on purpose and chose it. That, I think, is how it's supposed to work.